an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings, chapters 28 and 29. No, wait, chapters 29 and 30. That's the one. In this section, I don't really... So, first of all, we have Mata, who has this, like, amazing victory spurred by a, essentially, bloodlust in his men. And then we have Kuni, who it turns out is just as susceptible as any person to falling into the trap of getting high on his own shit. Thank God he has some people around him to talk him down, and that he's smart enough to see that they are talking sense to him. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks again to Kyle for commissioning this series. This has been quite a ride, and I just can't believe how much more of the story there is to go. I don't know what's going to happen. This section is just so... All right, so 29. The Battle of Wolf's Paw, the 10th month in the 4th year of the reign of righteous force. So... we get some details here about the positioning of Wolf's Paw, that it is like in this area that can be really difficult to get to because the channel is sort of tormented by this giant, what's the word? Not sinkhole. They say a 10-mile wide maelstrom of roiling water. Whirlpool, that's the one. Thank you, Kyle. That kind of wanders across, and you're never really sure where it's going to get. And if you get caught in it, it's really pretty much you're dead. And a lot of people wind up dead because people, despite knowing the danger, are just not really able to resist how much faster it is to get there by crossing this channel than to go by other means. So it's, you know, occasionally they wind up lucky and they do manage to make a big profit because they get across unscathed. But other times that does not work out for them. And I found that to be so crazy. Like, it's 10 miles wide, you know. Everything in this world is epic, legendary proportions. And I'm here for it. I like it. So let's go to Mata, who is hanging out on the one side of the channel and is essentially pouting. He's such a little brat here. I love it. First of all, there's the very valid grief over Kikomi, because not only is she dead, but she killed his uncle, the basically man who was his father for his whole life. So there's a combo of griefs happening here. There's the I miss her, I hate her, but I also miss her. There's I miss him, I'm mad at him, but I also miss him. And then there's the how could I be so stupid? I can't believe that she was a betrayer the entire time. And I love this line. Couple of lines. As he thought about what she had done, Mata's hands shook with rage, and he believed that he would strangle her himself if she were still alive. And yet he could not deny that even knowing the falsity of her words and pretended feelings, he missed her. He had taken something of great value hidden in his heart and willingly handed it to her, and she had torn it to pieces and scattered it to the winds so that it was gone forever. Yet he did not want to have it back. He wanted only to be able to give it to her again and again. Oh, that's a good line. Man, if that's not true, you're just like, yeah, you ruined everything, and yet I don't regret any of it at all, and I would totally do it again. That's like the whole premise behind movies like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, that's one of my favorite movies ever. It's just the acknowledgement that, yeah, we know this probably isn't going to work out, but we want it, anyway. We don't care that it's like going to end in heartbreak. It's just the getting to have it for a while. I don't regret doing this thing. It's just really beautiful. So Mata is assuming that once Finn was dead, that he would be, he'd be the head of the Zindu family, essentially. The Zindu family is only him, sure, but he would be the only one, and that he would be made Marshal of Kakru, and then they would take him off the duty on the other side of the channel and put him in charge of the battle at Wolf's Paw. But days pass and nobody moves him. And he is sitting there like, are you fucking really? Like, he is so insulted and so just fucking cranky about it. And I really enjoy when Pairing comes and talks to him and it's just like, if you want to be a leader, you got to be a fucking leader. Nobody just hands you shit. That's not how it works. Being a leader means that you demand things, that you inspire people to do a certain thing, not that you like want them to put you there. That's the opposite of being a leader. And speaking of Pairing, let's talk about him. Torulu Pairing, rebel tactician and advisor, entered the audience hall and knew right away that something was wrong. General Pashi Roma, commander-in-chief of the Alliance on Wolf's Paw, was staring at a scout's report on the tea table in front of him, his brows knit tight in a frown and his fingers tapping nervously. So what happens here is that Pairing had told Roma not to send these ships the way that he had, because Pairing has more experience in naval battles and skullduggery, and Roma did not want to listen to him and does it the way that he wants to do it, and they all wind up getting killed. And Pairing has to really restrain himself from being like, I told you so. And I love this part. Pairing tries to be like, well, maybe we can recover from this if we keep them close to shore, if we do this and that. And Roma bites his head off. What good are these tricks when Marana has airships? Pairing suppressed the urge to grab Roma by the neck of his robe and shake him. The old general was swinging wildly from overconfidence to despair. Yo, have you guys met somebody like this? Because I sure have, and it is so frustrating. It's just like they don't know what they want to believe. They don't know what they want to think. It's 1 second, they're like, everything is going to be fine. And the instant one thing goes wrong, they lose their shit. And then you're left to stand there and like cuddle them and make them feel better. I've had a couple of bosses like this, and it is so annoying because it's like they either don't, they're both sort of types of denial in a way. The overconfidence is a denial that like you might need to change something for this to work. Maybe you need to admit that you don't know everything. Maybe you need to admit that the system that you think is so like carefully measured and put in place isn't the right system. But then when they go to despair, you are in denial that there is something you could be doing about this. You just want to throw your hands up and act like it's a lost cause. And it's not. You just don't want to take responsibility. And so they're kind of two sides of the same coin, really, is like not wanting to look at the facts and not wanting to take responsibility or action. And Pairing is so much more, he's more experienced, and he's more like what's the word that I want? He's willing to face reality a little bit more. He's more of a realist. And he keeps on giving advice, and Roma just keeps like not listening to him, and it's so annoying. So they continue their conversation about what to do, and it's just annoying because Roma keeps arguing with him every step of the way. And then we have the Imperial Armada arrived at the southern shore of Wolf's Paw. In the Battle of Toazo Harbor that followed, the rebel ships, supported by land-based batteries, managed to hold out for 3 days against sustained air and sea assault from the Armada, sinking 6 ships of the line. As Roma predicted, Kindo Marana changed tactics and ordered an aerial bombardment of Tawaza, focusing on King Dalo's palace. As the airships approached the Tawaza, thousands of floating bamboo and paper lanterns rose into the air from the city. And they're like, looking at these like, what is this? And they're smart enough to know, this seems like bad news. We probably should figure out a way around them. But they're so small, and there's so many of them, that there's really no way to maneuver around them. And they try and hope that because they are as small as they are, there's no way they're going to be able to do too much damage. But what it turns out, the airships sailed into the swarm of floating lanterns like a whale amongst a school of minnows. The lanterns seemed to stick to the airship hulls like remoras. Then Marana heard the sound of an explosive pop, followed by hundreds more. Bright flashes of light sparkled over the hulls of the other airships, and the sunlit air between them also filled with the showering sparks of unattached lanterns exploding. So it turns out, this is genius. Pairing, you son of a bitch. He takes firework powder, collects as much of it as he can find, packs it into bamboo tubes, along with tons of tiny metal spikes to make it into shrapnel. So all of that gets packed inside the tube, and then they are attached to a floating lantern with a slow-burning fuse. And the outside of the lantern is coated with this, like, pine tar, like, sap, to make sure that it will stick to the ships, so that it's, like, in contact when it explodes. Fucking awesome. So genius. I love it so much. And this is very effective, but Roma won't pursue once they retreat. Which just, like, you could, he is so overcautious, man. Like, they could have, hit them while they're down. Send out more of these things. Well, I guess they couldn't send out more of them because it had taken him a while. Pairing had to use, like, all of the firework powder that he could find because it's really expensive. But that's just such a great moment. These little things that just cause such damage. And, I'm trying to find exactly how many ships are taken down. Spirit of Kiji escaped the swarm. Oh, here it is. The oars of some great airships dangled uselessly, the oarsmen having been killed by shrapnel. Others began to lose altitude, the gas bags having been punctured. Fires spread on hulls and gondolas. Spirit of Kiji escaped the swarm of deadly floating lanterns back to the safety of the sea, the rest of the surviving aerial fleet limping behind. Altogether, 4 Imperial ships were lost, and 2 more lost so much gas they could barely keep afloat and were no longer useful except as reserve float gas containers. So that's pretty fucking effective. Essentially, 6 are gone. And it would have just been such a good time to pursue and really, like, hammer home, yeah, motherfucker. But they don't do that because Roma. So, here comes the meeting where Roma has gathered up a bunch of commanders and advisors and wants to know what they think they should do. And Pairing is disgusted. Like, all of these guys, in his opinion, are here because they're trying to further their own, like, political careers. And that they're driven by, like, these petty arguments between families and houses. None of them are actually interested in making a good suggestion or taking a stand in any way, because anything that they do can be held against them at a later date. And it's so true, man. Like, even now, so every time, like, Pairing suggests something, and every time he does, there's inevitably, like, 3 people who are like, no, but they don't have any ideas of their own. It's like they don't want to do what he says, but they don't have any fucking alternatives to offer. And it's just so annoying. Oh my God. Like, we'll do what you say. Say anything. Go ahead, but no. These theatrical outbursts were exactly what he had expected. These men had no ideas of their own, but they were ready to shoot down others' proposals. Patiently, he said, I didn't say we should just allow them to land wherever they want. We should station troops along the northern and eastern shores, but leave Big Toe open. So, let's talk about Big Toe, which I hate this name so much. I just hate the word toe. I hate it. But Big Toe is basically a peninsula, an isthmus. The whole way that Big Toe works is that it's such a perfect spot for Marana to land, and it's enough space for all of his men that they know that he's not going to be able to resist, but it also creates this bottleneck where it's much easier for them to defend from. And it's not going to be easy for him to break through, even though they have a lot more men on their side. Or he has a lot more men on his side. Their men will be able to, just that tactical advantage, really keep them at bay. So yeah, it's a really tidy solution that turns out to be 100% true. That's exactly what, I wasn't sure, to jump ahead a little bit, if Marana was going to take the bait, because I kind of thought that he would see there was a reason for it being left open to him. But I guess he just really didn't think it through, or didn't think they had this kind of tactic. He should know that they have tactical minds based on the mini lanterns that did so much damage. But yeah, he does take the bait. And there's a lot of men here, guys. Again, 20,000 veterans made their way across the Big Island to the end of the Shinani Mountains on the coast. Marana's supply ships worked nonstop to transport all of them over to Big Toe. Added to the 20,000 fresh recruits originally carried there by the Armada, the Empire now had 40,000 troops camped on Big Toe, ready for the final assault. Yo, that's insanity. 40,000 men. I can't. That's too much. So, Roma, like a fucking idiot, just decides to sit there and let them have their fucking time. He thinks that if we don't attack them, that they're going to run out of supplies, that they're going to, and he just keeps thinking that, well, I don't know that I want to do that. Maybe we should do this, and doesn't make a decision on anything. So he gives them all of this time, when the whole point of getting them to land there in the first place was that they would be sort of trapped and they could be driven back. And he is just so resistant to doing the whole thing that was the point of this. Oh, so it winds up weeks later that they actually make their attack. And because he gave them so much time, they were able to do all of this shit on location, with digging trenches and secret areas where they can pop out from underground. It was just such a dumb move on his part. And I am very excited to talk about what Marana thinks of it. Or not Marana, Mata. So, meanwhile, as all of this is happening, Marana he's a smart guy. He still is a worthy adversary. And he has decided that it's going to be a good idea to get in there amongst all of the different Kakru, heads of houses, for lack of a better term, and sow discord among them, and essentially keep them from unifying the way that they need to be in order to win. And saying things like, well, why should your men die for these two? When they're trying to steal your land, you're just going to let your people be murdered on their behalf when they're undermining you and not respecting you, and they just want to use your boys for fodder. And you know, just the usual sort of, it's a really effective tactic. It turns out that when the tide turns, these men will jump right back on board. But it almost led, if it hadn't been for Mata, it almost led to everything being completely, like, collapsing. So I'm just going to read this. Your country is already under Kukru occupation. Although the coming battle will be fought on Gon territory, the largest contingent of armed men on Wolf's Paw belongs to Kukru. Even if the rebels were to achieve the impossible and win the coming battle, do you imagine that Roma or Thufi will leave Wolf's Paw willingly? It's easy to invite a foreign army onto your soil, but harder to get them to leave peacefully. So, you know, these arguments, it's not even that I think that they're necessarily untrue in some cases, like something like that. Yeah, getting them to leave probably would be hard. But you got to worry about whether you're going to win before you can think that far ahead. It's the sort of thing that requires that you trust your alliance more than is comfortable. And that's always the case in war, right? You have to have so much faith that even if things go your way, the people on your side are still not going to screw you, even though they may have the chance to do that. So, yeah, the King Dalo basically here listens to him, and they're starting to be like, all right, maybe we should pull our guys out of this area. So, Mata. Perrin comes to see him. And he tells him basically, like, the fate of all of this is kind of in your hands right now. And Mata's basically like, well, if it's in my hands, then I think the king and the general would tell me that it was in my hands instead of having me be here and be like a ferryman to all of these other soldiers. To Rulu Perrin's side, Mata sounded like a petulant child. I'm an old man, and I'm no warrior. But during my years watching the rise and fall of those in power, I've learned that great men do not wait for their greatness to be recognized. If you wish to have the respect that you yearn for, then you must grab it and fight off anyone who would say otherwise. If you wish to be a duke, you act like a duke. If you wish to be commander-in-chief, then act like a commander-in-chief. And Mata, like, he could get really mad at this guy. Guess what? He doesn't. He stops and is like, oh shit, you're right though. And Kuni did that. Kuni just became a duke. He just decided. And that was what happened. And then at the end of this section, how silly it is for me to sulk here when there is a war to be fought. So, let's talk about the battle, because this is insane. First let's talk about the collapsing mines. As some Imperial soldiers pulled away the supporting beams deep in the tunnels, hundreds of Kukru soldiers fell into the gaping holes in the ground, where they were cut down before they even knew what was happening. The defensive structures that the rebels had taken so much care to build fell apart within seconds. The collapsing mines revealed swarms of Imperial soldiers. Why is it so hard to say Imperial soldiers? That is a friggin' blah. The collapsing mines revealed swarms of Imperial soldiers rushing out of the ground. This, combined with the sudden general assault above ground, shocked the Kukru troops into utter confusion. Though General Roma valiantly tried to rally his men, the defensive lines crumbled before the Imperial onslaught. So he yells for them to fall back. General Roma sent a rider with orders for the Fasa army to join him and hold the line, but the rider returned with the news that Oiati, the Fasa commander, thought it more prudent to wait and see how the situation developed. Roma knew then that the battle was lost. The Tiro states would fall like dominoes, one after the other, because they could not fight as one. So, Toaza, meanwhile, everybody has decided to abandon ship. And by ship, I mean Toaza. there are so many people trying to get off this island that the ships leaving are riding dangerously low in the water from all of the weight. People are like giving away all of their possessions in order to buy a space on these boats. The Gon soldiers hurried aboard, driving away the crowds of civilians begging for a berth. They commandeered every merchant vessel and fishing boat. The desperate crowd then constructed rafts from doors and bits of furniture and launched them into the harbor with no thought on how such unseaworthy vessels would survive the long southward detour to the Big Island. Minor nobles who were not lucky enough to be taken on the king's ship promised the soldiers untold riches if they would just be allowed to climb on board. So General Roma is watching all of this fall apart and is just like, for fuck's sake. Which, you know, Roma, it's your own goddamn fault. I feel for him in a way because he's just so, like, clueless, but also he's like Cheaty from The Good Place. You just can't make a decision, and thus everything falls apart around him while he's standing there figuring out what he wants to do. The armada coming towards them that makes everybody panic even more turns out to be Mata Zindu with his 2,000 men aboard 20 ships. 2,000, may I remind you? 2,000. Remember how much the other guys had? 40,000. Like, granted, there's plenty of soldiers there already, but still, like, Jesus. Mata observed the confusion in the harbor with disgust. He spread his ships out in an arc and sealed the harbor. All the ships clamoring to leave were ordered to go straight back to the docks. The royal transport carrying King Dalo dared to test Mata's resolve, and Mata promptly ordered Theka Chemo's ship to ram it. "I've already killed a king," Chemo said. His tattooed, laughing face terrified the Gon sailors. "I'm happy to send yours to meet King Huno." The sailors did not resist as Chemo's men boarded the royal transport, brandishing their weapons. They chained the royal transport to Chemo's ship and dragged it back to Tuaza. The other escaping ships followed. So, they get onto dry land, and General Roma is like, all right, I appreciate you keeping everybody from completely abandoning us, but we still do need to evacuate the soldiers. And Matsu's like, bitch, that's the opposite of what we're doing. We need to counterattack. And Roma, understandably, is like horrified. And Mata doesn't even take a second to really explain it to him. He's like, no, this is what we're doing. And when Roma again tries to argue, this moment, I love this. Roma, he really thinks that he's being brave here. Roma looked into young Mata's eyes. He remembered the rumors about Mata's cruelties at Dimu. He remembered the tales about his recklessness and hot temper. He wanted blood, only blood. This is why King Thufi and Marshal Zindu made me commander-in-chief instead of this man. Roma tried to straighten his back and make his voice as authoritative as possible. I'm ordering you to retreat. Your job is to ferry us back to the Big Island safely. Mata unsheathed Na Oranha and in a single motion lopped off Roma's head. The Doubt Ender would not tolerate a commander who vacillated and had no heart for battle. Well, that was unexpected. I really thought Mata would imprison him. I really did. Chopping his head off right fucking there didn't even occur to me. I should have remembered that Mata does not have the calming influence of Kuni at his side in this scene. And he is over it. And so he turns and tells everybody the ships have all been burned, along with all the provisions. There is no way to retreat. The only food you've got is what you've already eaten. And if you want to eat something else, you're going to have to kill them to take it away from them. And he turns around and rides out alone, screaming with his like sword above his head. And everybody sort of stares after him for a second. And who but my friend Rotho, brother of Defiro, who rode a goddamn narwhal, decides that he is going to be the second person to ride out. He's the first one to follow Mata, which Mata notes later. And he thinks to himself, all of life is a gamble, and just decides, fuck it. And he would rather die than stay behind. He would rather do something wild and brave. And I love this. The odds were impossible against them, but so what? There was no need for strategies and tricks now. In their minds, they were already dead, freed from the hope of retreat or rescue. They had nothing to lose. Ratho Miro rushed at an Imperial soldier and made no attempt to parry or protect himself. He simply attacked. He severed the sword arm of the man even as the other man's sword bit into his shoulder, but in his bloodlust he felt nothing. Ratho roared, pulled the sword out, and cut another I'll never be able to say that. He knew Doph would think he was foolish, but he also thought his brother would be proud of him. I'm fighting just like General Zindu, he thought, remembering the time when General Zindu had flown high over the walls of Zudi and fought until no man from Zana dared to face him. Now he knew just how General Zindu must have felt, and it was indeed glorious. So, they fucking tear these people apart. It's insanity. The fact that they just have no fear and that they have accepted death is the most dangerous part of all. And, you know, that was something that was said of like the Vikings, say, was they had their legends were all positive about the afterlife. There was no like, there was no punishment for having killed. You were rewarded for having been a warrior. So they looked forward to death in some ways just as much as they looked forward to like going home and being with their families. And so there wasn't that same kind of fear because they were like, well, I guess this is over and I'm going to go drink some beers with fucking Thor. And, you know, I mean, that's certainly a good way to motivate people. The Imperial soldiers, the men of Kukru, seemed inhuman. They were oblivious to pain and showed no interest in defending themselves. Every strike from their swords felt as if they put all their strength into it. They did not want to survive, only to kill. How could you fight men like that? The sane could not withstand the insane. So they fucking start to win. And finally, the remaining soldiers that were on the other side are like, okay, you know what? I think we need to fucking bounce. But they are not being allowed to bounce. It is, you know, there is no easy escape for them because there's just these airships that they were ferried in on, and they all are trying to pile onto them to the point that they can't even like get into the air anymore. It is really... So let me read this. 20,000 soldiers of the Emperor died during the Battle of Wolf's Paw. 20,000 more surrendered. 9 times the Imperials tried to rally and make a stand, and 9 times Mata Zindu's berserkers broke through. The battle lasted 10 days, though its outcome had been determined on the first. The Imperial ships could not enter Tawaza Harbor, filled with burning ships. They milled about in confusion until it became clear the battle on land was lost, and then the Armada retreated back up the eastern shore, hoping to regroup near Big Toe. The airships made attempts to land and rescue some of the senior army officers, but Zinju's berserkers were always so close on the heels of fleeing Imperials that such attempts failed time after time. 5 airships were even captured as they struggled to lift off, dragged down to the earth by panicked Imperial soldiers hanging on to the gondola and one another's feet, like anchor chains made of men. Yikes, guys. By the time the Armada reached the Imperial camp at Big Toe, it was too late to salvage anything. The young men of Zana who had followed Marana and Naman, filled with hope and dreams of martial glory, were all either dead or kneeling as prisoners of the rebels. Yikes. That is fucking amazing, and I love it so much. And let's talk about Naman and Marana for a second, because I kind of like both these guys. Tenno Naman and Kindo Marana had hoped to enjoy their greatest triumph close up and were thus not aboard the airships. They regretted that decision now. I bet they fucking did. The rebels surrounded the last detachment of Imperial soldiers, and Naman and Marana looked longingly at the distant silhouettes of fleeing Imperial airships. Naman thought about Tozy at home on Rui and wondered how the old dog was getting on in the cold weather with his limp. "Old friend," Marana said, "it would have been better if I had never come to your house. Now, instead of pruning the wolfberry shrubs and sailing your fishing skiff, you will spend your last years as a prisoner. I do not understand why we lost today, and I am truly sorry." Naman brusquely brushed off Marana's apology. "I spent my life fighting to see Zana exalted above all other Tiro states. To have the chance to serve the Empire again in my old age is an honor. But we live at the mercy of the gods. The race goes not always to the swift, nor the battle always to the strong. We have fought as well as we were able, and the rest is mere chance." "You're kind to lay no blame on me." Marana looked around and sighed. "We should prepare to surrender. There's no sense in letting more men die needlessly." So then Naman sort of fools him for a second and says, "Before you surrender, can you do me a favor? And if you get a chance, check in on my house and see that my dog is okay." And Marana sees him smiling, and he's like, "Oh shit, but it's too late." And Naman says, "Thank you for indulging my last bit of vanity. I have never surrendered." Naman unsheathed his sword and wiped its sharp edge across his gaunt neck. He fell like a great oak tree. For minutes his strong heart continued to pump the blood of his body out into a spreading pool around him. That's 100% what I expected. I was like, there's no fucking way this guy's gonna surrender. Marana might. Naman's not gonna do that shit. He's too old for this. And sure enough, I kind of respect that, you know, like, there comes a point where you're done. And they intend to come back and bury his body later. But as they're thinking that, the sky was filled with the wings of Minjen falcons. Dozens, no, hundreds of them. No one could ever recall hearing of so many falcons appearing together away from the shores of Lake Arituso on Mount Kiji, or Lake Arisuso. The falcons swooped down. They moved not like solitary predators, but like a flock of starlings. The flock dove as one and picked up the body of Tano Naman. Then the flock turned and flew westward over the sea, eventually disappearing over the horizon. Legend had it that the sons of Zana who fell after great deeds in battle would be taken away by Lord Kiji, god of all birds, to eternal rest in the heavens. So that's a nice moment. I like that. And then Mata tells Ratho that he's going to be his new right-hand man, since Ratho had such faith in him that he was the first to follow after Mata announced that he was going to basically do a suicide run. His only regret was that DeFiro was not around to see this moment, which, like, yeah, totally. And the two of them are just going to have some fucking stories to tell. So Mata is not real impressed with Marana. He's looking at him and is just kind of like, you know, you are a pencil pusher, basically. You're not a warrior. Naman was an old man who would rather kill himself than face me in one-on-one combat. Well, I guess it's not kill himself. It was, he sent up his own old, like, younger, fitter men to face him. They had fought well with their minds, but they did not match his ideal. Was this the best Zana had to offer? Where was an opponent clothed in martial splendor equal to his own? Yeah, they don't have that. There was no man greater among all the rebels than Mata Zindu, not even King Thufi. There is something, though, and I understand this. There is something about, like, winning, and not that he wasn't, not that the army itself didn't have a huge challenge, because the fact that they won is pure miraculous, like straight up. But I'm talking about like when you are hanging out with people and you're looking for somebody that's like, you feel like is quote on your level and nobody there seems to be, it's a really like bummer feeling. You're like, I just come on. Does anybody have anything for me here? Like, you know, they were presenting a challenge because of sheer numbers and not because of the fact that they like were really skilled warriors necessarily. They were smart about the way that they approached things, and Mata has yet to really appreciate how important that is. Mata seems to think that comes second to being a good warrior, and that if you're good enough, even if you're not smart about it, you can still win. But that's because Mata is enormous and a friggin' like force of nature versus an ordinary person who knows that they are up against people of equal strength to them. Mata doesn't have to think about things in that sense. So yeah, he's going to face a lot more disappointment in life on that front, because nobody is like Mata at all. All right, so let's talk about the surrender of Irishi and Kuniguru taking shit over. Luan Zia decides that he is going to leave, which Kuni's a little bummed about. And he says, because Kuni's just like, you just, stay, come on. But he says, I wish to go serve Han, a small and weak state, and the last of the 6 states to be free, but nonetheless my home. Kuni and Luan toasted each other with bowls of sorghum liquor before Luan went on his way. Both attributed their tears to the burning drink. News of the fall of Pan had already reached the city, and the streets were filled with young men of Han milling about, excitedly talking of a new era. I'm going to say pan. Pan sounds too much like the word for bread in Spanish. So, all right, I'm gonna jump ahead here, because this whole, like, I feel so sad for Luan, honestly. Like, he feels like he has achieved his goal, but he's not sure that the spirits are happy with him and that his father is happy with him. But let's go to Kuni. There are all of these surrendered Imperial troops, and he doesn't know what to do with them. And Kogo recommends you should just let them go nuts. Just allow them to sack their own city. And it turns out to be really smart, even though it's like horrifying. But he says what you do is they are all soldiers of the Empire, right? So they go out there, sack the city they were supposed to have been defending, make a lot of enemies, and then you come in and calm it all down again, and everybody feels like you're the good guy who is finally putting a leash on these maniacs, and they are on your side, the common people, which is kind of brilliant. And it's horrifying though, because of what has to be done in order to get it to work. But I'm of the opinion that there is probably no way to take over the capital without there being like this kind of violence. I don't feel like it's possible to get everybody on your side and be secure without doing something underhanded and really like morally gray like this. So how will we ensure that the surrendered soldiers of Pan won't turn on us? The possibility of mutiny is great. We must do what we can to preserve the fruits of our gamble. Those who would be great must be great in all measures, including cruelty. Kogo's reasoning troubled Kuni, but he was always willing to listen to counsel. Reluctantly, he agreed to Rin's plan. It was whispered amongst the surrendered imperial troops that they would be allowed to loot Pan as a reward for their submission, as long as they did not kill anyone. A few bold soldiers went into the street to test out the rumor. Kuni's men watched them, but did nothing. By afternoon, the former imperial barracks were empty. The soldiers had free reign of the entire city. Pan was treated as though it had been conquered, except that the conquering army was composed of the men who had sworn to defend it. They broke into the wealthy mansions lining streets, took whatever they fancied, and did as they liked to the men and women they found inside. The soldiers did take care not to kill anyone, but there were many forms of suffering short of death. For 10 days, the streets of Pan became a living hell, and families huddled in basements and shuddered while they listened to the cries and screams of the less fortunate. The immaculate city became stained with terror, blood, avarice, and cravenness. During this time, Kunigaru kept his own men in the palace, away from the chaos in the streets. Kogoyelu, however, took a few men and went to the imperial archives, where the empire's census and tax records and all other administrative papers of the civil bureaucracy were kept. So he goes in there, and I love this, that Defiro's with him and is like, why are you worried about this area? Is there something valuable in here? Is there gold in here? Are there like old maps? Is there art? I just love it. He just doesn't understand where the actual like power lays, you know. An object is finite, but having information? So, while the former imperial soldiers rampaged in the streets of Pan, see, I keep calling it Pan, Kuni had to get away from the horrors he had unleashed. Here it comes, guys. He chose to wander through the silent corridors and empty halls of the palace. This description, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but trust me, it's very impressive. The palace is the kind of luxury that feels like a joke. That's the best way I can put it. The kind of thing. So there's a moment, and I think it was in the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which I've only seen like 2 episodes. But there's a point where somebody offers her a bottled water, and she's like, "Oh no, thanks, I'm okay." And rather than put it back in the fridge, they just drop it in the trash because she didn't want it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, well." And this is what it feels like to me, like the kind of indulgence that is so obscene that it's like, how is this allowed? And this is where a lot of us have been getting lately regarding politics, where when you stop and think about how long you'd have to work, even making $100 an hour to become a billionaire, it's over 1,000 years. So how is anyone allowed to make that kind of money while there are people who can't pay to live? And that's where I'm at with this. He whispers about how the different titles are just labels, yet the labels changed how one behaved. He had already become used to the idea of himself as the Duke of Zudi, and now he was growing used to the idea of himself as the King of Jafika. Might he grow used to another label? Might he grow used to being the object of awe and wonder and perhaps fear and hatred? And I love that he comes across what's obviously a stag that's labeled a horse. The, remnant from earlier in the book. And he's just like, that's weird. So he finally comes across a basically harem. And all of these women are standing there like, well, obviously you're the one in charge now, so I guess we're going to have to deal with this. Away from Gia, he had never yielded to the temptation of the company of other women. But he had physical needs, and having come so close to death sharpened his appetite. The palette of tantalizing shades of flesh before him would not, could not, should not be resisted. Didn't he deserve some rewards? Didn't he deserve to relax just a little? A brave man deserves a great beauty, one of the women said. She was lovelier than any women Kuni knew, and she wore nothing except a necklace made from shark's teeth. The strange, barbaric jewels somehow seemed fitting to Kuni, and her smile pulled him in. He thought for a moment he could see her face flicker into the image of a skull, but then he blinked and the vision went away. Well, we find out later that was a god who was fucking with him. Luckily, he's got friends, but it comes real close. So here comes Rinkoda. Kuni, it's time to stop. And Kuni just gives him the finger, basically. Kuni, Rin said again, louder, look at me. Have you forgotten what we came to do? Kuni frowned in annoyance. Rin was intruding on his daydream. He would like to live like the emperor. He would eat out of golden bowls with jade spoons. He would smoke in coral pipes, ethereal tobacco that had been cured and sifted 100 times by specially trained monkeys who could climb the cliffs where the tobacco was grown, fed by dew. He would drink tea that consisted of the tenderest leaves, plucked by young children whose fingers were nimble enough not to break the buds prematurely and release their flavor. He would have a new woman to bed every night, but these two he would always keep for comfort when he had a surfeit of the new. You should address me as Lord Geru, Kuni said, or maybe even Your Majesty. Rin is like, okay, I think I'm gonna need some backup. And he comes in with Kogo, and they fucking dump a huge basin of ice water over his naked body, which is the best thing I've ever seen. I love this whole thing. So they are just irritated. So he says, what's the meaning of this? To which Kogo was like, what is the meaning of this, man? Pointing to the women and all the wine and everything is littered around the bed. Kongzi, I want to enjoy myself for a bit. I deserve it. Have you forgotten the men who died in the Grand Tunnels? Have you forgotten the children fallen by the roadside from starvation? The mothers and sons forcefully separated by Corvée administrators so the Emperor could add another stone to his mausoleum? Have you forgotten all the men who have died to fight for an end to all this and the women who will mourn them forever? Have you forgotten your wife, who prays for your safety daily, dreaming that you will achieve greatness and bring people relief? And Kuni manages to be ashamed of himself. And they all are like, I am ashamed of you. They all just flat out, Kogo says it and averts his eyes, and everybody else does as well. I love it. This is so... Kuni is human. We all have the capacity, But I love... And he still puts up a fight here. How dare you lecture me? Aren't you the one who counseled me to allow the Imperial soldiers to turn Pan into a lawless hell? You urged me to be great in all things so that I can keep the reins of power. I'm enjoying the role you designed for me. You are very much mistaken, Lord Geru. I counseled you to seize power so that you may use it to do good, not so that you can indulge in its exercise as its own end. If you cannot see the difference, then I have indeed been blind. And he's like, fuck. Yeah, okay. And he sits down and is like, also, please fucking don't tell Gia about this. Which I'm like, good call, buddy. Honestly, there are times where I don't think telling somebody that you cheated is a good idea. I understand the desire for honesty, but most of the time when people share it after having cheated a long time ago, they're only doing it to get relief. And that's selfish. You're going to destroy somebody, but you're only doing that because it's going to make you feel better, even though you made that choice. Maybe you just have to live with that bad choice you made, and that's on you. But, I don't feel that way all the time. Mostly I think you should tell, because I just think that somebody has the right to know that you are that deceitful. But something like this, where he like is in a really particular situation that's a rare thing, where he let power get to his head, as so many people do, for a few days. I don't feel like it's worth telling her, because this is a tough thing to like really explain unless you're in it, you know? And I think he's learned his lesson, is not going to do this shit again, is the other thing. It's one thing to keep it a secret when you're planning on continuing it, because you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. But keeping it a secret because you realize you fucked up and you never want to do that again, that might be different. So anyway, Duke Guru announced the looting of Pan would stop immediately, and henceforth he would govern Pan with a gentle hand. All the cruel and complicated laws of the empire would be abolished, and the profession of paid litigators eliminated. The people cheered wildly about this. There would be no more corvées, and taxes would be reduced to 1/10 of what they were before. Only 3 criminal laws would be enforced. First, a murderer would be executed. Second, one who physically injured another had to pay compensation. And third, thieves must return their loot and pay a penalty. Which is a little bit lax for me, but you know what? Go on with it, because it's probably better to start out simple and go from there. So yeah, and all of the soldiers who went ahead and looted everything have no support among the people. So they either get to try and like act like what they did never happened and hope people forget what they look like, or they have to go back and like kind of depend on the protection of Kuni by being another like official royal soldier again. So it's just such a smart idea. By ruling Pan now with a gentle hand, you are like the spring breeze after winter of frost. Now that they have suffered for 10 days, they appreciate your kindness 10 times more. You are a cruel and manipulative man, Kogo. The common people are like unruly children. If you give them candy always, they'll think you should give them candy. But if you slap them hard and then hand them candy, they will come crawling to you and lick your hand. You're comparing me to men who treat their wives like dogs, to be beaten and then caressed. It sounds harsh and unpleasant, Kogo said, but the world is full of harsh and unpleasant things that must be done, especially if you would like to soar as high as an eagle. And I like this. Kuni is like, well, you're probably right, but I don't want to look at myself right now, so... And Kogo realizes that Kuni isn't calling him Kagzi anymore. Speaking about the world as it was did not always endear you to those you served. Yeah, right? So Kuni gets to work. He is just as devoted as he ever was to doing all of the minutia that it takes to like run a city. And meanwhile, Rin Koda is checking on the criminal element and finding out kind of what's going on there, what kind of deals they can make with some of the shadier characters, and make it so that they don't let things get out of control, but they also are sort of working together in a way, which I honestly feel is like the best you can hope for when it comes to organized crime. So in my line of business, Scorpion said, much of my profit comes from promises being kept. For example, a man might promise he would pay everything back within a day if the house would just spot him another 1,000 gold pieces for the next bet. I like to believe that people keep their promises, but it's always better if you can be sure, and the best way to be sure is to make sure the man understands that I have the power to hurt him a great deal if he tries to renege. King Thufi has promised that anyone who captured Emperor Irishi would be king of Jafika, but it seems to me that if King Kuni wants to be sure the promise is kept, he ought to show others that he has teeth. Any claim becomes more legitimate when it is backed up by arms, and any army that wants to come into Jafika must pass through Thoko Pass. So the next day, Rin Koda dispatches an army to Thoko Pass. Sure, Kuni had asked him to send messengers to Matazindu as soon as possible and invite him to come to Pan and share in the victory and help defend it, but Rin always believed in self-reliance. Why ask for others to help when you were capable of taking care of everything yourself? Besides, Pan was already secure. Why should Mata share in a glory that belonged to Kuni and his loyal followers alone? Wouldn't it be better if just King Kuni became king of Jafika? A man who didn't think of himself first was not someone the gods favored. He was sure Kuni would agree. You dumb fuck. You dumb fuck. Do you know what this is gonna look like? It's gonna look like fucking Kuni just decided to dump Mata and go and be king. Mata's gonna be so pissed. You idiot. It's gonna look like he's trying to defend against them coming at him. Oh my God. This idiot. This is so bad. You're ruining everything. Oh God. I just can't. Like, what are you thinking? And you didn't even talk to him about it. You're just doing this shit? And now what? Kuni's going to be like, he did that without asking me. So that makes him look like he doesn't have control of his people. Like, there's no good that's going to come of this. Oh, this is terrible. So, then we have the gods talking amongst each other. Tazu, the unpredictable, who did you enjoy sleeping with Kuni Garu, Tazu the unpredictable? Ah, so you saw Lutho. I looked lovely, didn't I? He's harder to tempt than you thought, isn't he? I note that he didn't pick you as a favorite. A matter I blame on his taste. Well, I had my fun, and that's what matters. I enjoy this. So they start talking about like this nobody coming in and stealing the show, which, you know, gods are like a little bit vain in that they think that they can predict who's going to be successful and who's not. But yeah, I'm just, you guys, I'm just so frustrated with Rin right now. What are you why aren't you thinking about what impression this is going to make on everybody? They're of course going to think, dude, that you, it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. I'm trying to think of like any way that Kuni gets out of that kind of mess after Rin does this. And I can't think of a single way Mata ever trusts him again. He's always going to wonder if Kuni didn't purposely do that and then like back off. I don't know. I guess it all depends on how Mata is greeted. But like if Kuni doesn't know that they're up there, he doesn't have any control over that. I'm annoyed. So yeah, so that's the end of that section. Kyle, he's laughing at me. Just, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Like this is the kind of victory that you could barely even have hoped for. And now you're flushing it down the fucking toilet, you idiot. You dick. Okay. I am going to wrap up. Thank you very much, Kyle, for coming. Thank you to everybody who has been listening. I know that there's actually 2 people lately who have been listening without reading the book, which I find crazy. But they say that it's really fun to listen to me talk about it, even though they haven't read it. So, you know, like, God bless. And yeah, thank you guys all so much. And I will be seeing you very soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.